Welcome to Halloween-a-thon 2023. The goal was to watch 31 movies that I've never seen before during the month of October, and here are my thoughts and ratings on those movies. Number 1, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. It's the horror movie that no one asked for. The story is a twist on the classic Winnie the Pooh tale, but this time Pooh and friends become feral and grow a taste for blood and honey. They really cheap out on some of the kills, either showing them as an animation or just implying the kill, and not actually showing the death on screen. The whole movie is comprised of a series of dumb decisions made by both the victims and the killers. Only Pooh and Piglet are featured. They missed out on a great opportunity to create a team of crazed animal killers. My guess is due to lack of costume budget. I mean, the Pooh costume literally doesn't change facial expressions the whole movie. He just smiles. Overall, this movie was terrible and doesn't deserve a sequel, which is apparently already in the works. Number 2, Slaughterhouse. What happens when a college sorority adopts an evil sloth as their mascot? You get a slaughterhouse. Even though this movie was just as unbelievable as Pooh, Blood and Honey, it was executed way better. It really embraces the absurdity and slowly gets crazier as it goes. The sloth is able to use cell phones, computers, and even drive cars. I mean, she's one impressive sloth. While the premise is ridiculous, this movie was highly entertaining and worth checking out if you're a fan of comical horror movies. Or sloths. Number 3, Mortuary. Local teens stumble across a bizarre cult that includes some familiar locals. They attempt to dive deeper into the cult's activities, but are thwarted by a mysterious hooded stranger. The acting was decent in the film, but the first hour is a slow burn. The last 30 minutes were the best part. A young Bill Paxton is in this one, but not nearly enough. You can never have too much Bill Paxton, and he's by far the best part of the film. Number 4, The Rage, Carrie 2. A sequel to the 1976 Carrie film, The Rage Carrie 2 introduces us to yet another teenage girl in the midst of developing telekinetic powers. Our new protagonist's name is Rachel, not Carrie, or even Carrie 2. The movie has a strong 90s feel to it, and a nostalgic soundtrack. I felt like the movie's tie-in to the original Carrie both helped it and hurt it. I'm sure the tie-in was a great marketing ploy to fill seats in theaters, but it also set expectations higher than the film could achieve. The movie follows the same general framework as the original, making it predictable and a bit disappointing. I feel like they should have either made this movie an overall remake of the original Carrie that's just set in the 90s, or created a fresh story with drastic differences to the original film's format. When Rachel finally goes full rage mode, she has a cool thing happen with her tattoo. It reminded me of something you'd see happen to an X-Men character or something, but at the same time it felt unnecessary, like it didn't really fit with the rest of the movie. Number 5, The Blackening. A group of friends reunite at a secluded cabin in the woods, but their fun getaway quickly goes south as they're forced to play a twisted game for their lives. This film was great. It pulls elements from movies like Saw, Jumanji, and Scream, as well as plenty of other horror movies. The characters point out any horror movie tropes and attempt to avoid them at all costs. There are plenty of suspenseful moments throughout the film and lots of hilarious jokes. There's never a dull moment. My favorite character was Clifton. He's sort of like Steve Urkel mixed with Carlton from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He had me laughing every time he was on screen. Overall, I would highly recommend this movie if you want something that's both scary and funny. Number 6, Spree. A struggling content creator named Kurt comes up with an unorthodox way to create content for his channel, by joining a rideshare service and killing his customers. This film has some big names in it, including Stranger Things' Joe Keery, Sashir Zameda, and Kyle Mooney. This movie is done in a found footage style, except the footage comes from videos Kurt posted to social media, as well as videos from his victims' phones. The filmography is great though. Everything feels authentic, which adds to the realism and suspense. I enjoy how much of the footage comes from Kurt's live streams, so you can see comments from his followers as he performs violent acts of murder. They say things such as, oh, that's not real, or Kurt isn't going to go through with it, which shines a light on how toxic social media can actually be. In fact, the entire message of the film is to express how social media can easily influence its users, especially those which are starved for attention, and it does a fantastic job at relaying this message. Number 7, Evil Bong. 4 roommates purchase a cursed bong from a magazine ad. While the bong gets them super high, it also kills anyone that smokes from it. One by one, the bong sucks in each character as if it's smoking their souls or something. The world inside the bong is full of strippers, and for some reason, tons of other full moon characters. They never explain why all these random characters are roaming around inside the bong, though. I want to know why they're in there. And also, how is being stuck in a strip club with infinite weed a bad death for a stoner? Seems like maybe the bong wasn't so evil after all. It felt like 20 minutes of the film was just scenes of the same handful of strippers dancing topless for the camera. I guess they could have used something worse for filler, but it's still filler. The characters are visited by one of the roommate's wisecracking grandpas about mid-movie. While he's one of the funnier parts of the film, the scene was, once again, just drawn-out filler and had no relevance to the story. Tommy Chong plays the bong's previous owner, Jimbo, and he's pretty funny. The only problem is, he wasn't in the film enough. They weren't shy about using him to promote the film, though, as he's front and center on the cover. My biggest complaint about the movie is that one character plays Super Mario World while he is clearly in the first stages of the game. He claims he was interrupted on level 13. Even a stoner would know what level they're on in Mario World. Come on. Number 8, An American Werewolf in London. Two young Americans are backpacking across the English countryside when they are viciously attacked by a mysterious creature. This one was on my radar for a while, but for some reason I never got around to watching it. Well, this year I finally had to give it a go, as I had the chance to meet the film's star, David Naughton, at a convention. Needless to say, I'm glad I finally watched the film, as it was very entertaining. Although, meeting the star the day after seeing him naked in this movie was admittedly a bit awkward. The pacing of the film is a little slow at times, yet remains interesting enough to keep the viewer fully invested. When the film does pick up the pace, things get really intense, really fast. The scenes with the werewolf are all extremely creepy, unexpectedly violent, and incorporate some very impressive special effects for 1981. The transformation scene alone makes this film worth watching, as it's one of the most impressive and realistic werewolf transformations that I've seen in a movie, and it was done with practical effects. The film also does a great job at slowly transforming the undead character Jack with each appearance. He starts off with realistically brutal wounds, and by the end is almost completely decomposed. Each time he appears, you wonder how much he's degraded since the last time he was on the screen. I'd like to note that the film not only references the Universal Wolfman film with Lon Chaney, but it also makes reference to the Hammer film Curse of the Werewolf with Oliver Reed. Both great classics in the werewolf movie genre. My only complaint is that the ending felt a bit abrupt, but I also couldn't think of any other way that the film could have improved that ending. Number 9, An American Werewolf in Paris. A group of Americans are visiting Paris when a strange encounter with a mysterious woman leads to trouble, involving werewolves. This movie doesn't retain the same pacing as An American Werewolf in London, and it doesn't feel connected at all. The werewolves in this movie were created with CGI as opposed to practical effects, and look nothing like the werewolves in the previous film. They actually look far less creepy. The film tries to lean into the comedy angle, but just comes off as cheesy. I mean, the movie starts off with a ridiculous bungee jumping scene that really lowers one's expectations for the rest of the film. Overall, the film isn't a terrible watch, but it definitely fails to hold up to its predecessor. If I'd seen this one first, I may have liked it slightly more, but it's still not great. Number 10, Body Bags. An anthology film including 3 segments, hosted by a gruesome mortician played by John Carpenter. The first 2 segments are directed by John Carpenter, with the third directed by Toby Cooper. The film includes many notable actors and appearances, such as David Naughton, Wes Craven, Tom Arnold, Robert Carradine, David Warner, Stacy Keach, and Mark Hamill. The first segment mentions a series of murders taking place in Haddonfield, the location of Michael Myers and Carpenter's Halloween films. The segments all have their own feel to them. The first is suspenseful horror, the second is comedy sci-fi, and the third is supernatural. Each segment is very entertaining in its own way, and the characters all feel natural and realistic despite crazy circumstances in each tale. Carpenter was awesome as the coroner. He cracks funny jokes, drinks disturbing fluids, and does a great job at breaking up each story with his humorous antics, as disturbing as they may be. If you're a John Carpenter fan, or even a fan of chilling tales of horror and suspense, then I would recommend checking this one out. Also, you get to see Mark Hamill's bare ass in this movie. Number 11, Unmasked Part 25. A masked serial killer falls in love with a blind woman who is unaware of his murderous tendencies. The Masked Killer is supposed to be a spoof of Jason Voorhees and the Friday the 13th movies, even going as far as to say that he spent time at a camp as a child and was thought to have drowned. The mask he wears is also the same mask used on the poster for Friday the 13th Part 5, which was never actually featured in that film, as well as the mask worn by Lord Humongous in Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. The film is supposed to be a comedy horror, but seems to struggle in finding a good middle ground between the two genres. Some scenes are heavy with corny jokes and cheesy dialogue, while others are brutally violent. There were even a few scenes that were just pure drama with no comedy at all. It all felt a bit incoherent. Overall, it's reminiscent of a trauma movie, especially The Toxic Avenger, but doesn't quite reach that level of enjoyment. I will have to admit, the kills in this movie are brutal and well done. They actually put some of the deaths in the later Friday the 13th films to shame. The first murder alone is intense, as the killer rips a guy's face off from behind. Sadly, the awesome kills are really the only reason to watch this one, as the story is pretty slow and the jokes are super cheesy. This film also brings the bare men's ass count to 3 this year, which was definitely not intentional. Number 12, Totally Killer. The legacy of a small-town killer is brought back to life as he returns 35 years later to kill again, this time killing the mother of a high schooler named Jamie. With her mother dead, Jamie's only choice is to go back in time and stop the killer before he commits his first string of murders. Throughout most of the movie, Jamie struggles to protect the original victims of the killer, who are all ditzy and uncooperative. There are a lot of elements that are similar to films like Back to the Future and Scream, with the film even making direct reference to Back to the Future. There's a lot of witty comparisons to how the world of the 80s was more laxed and less politically correct as the world of today. I read that the killer's mask design was inspired by 80s icons such as Kiefer Sutherland, Rob Lowe, and Dolph Lundgren, although to me it looks like a direct spoof of Max Headroom, another familiar face of the 80s. Number 13, Mad Monster Party. All the classic monsters are invited to a party, thrown by their leader, Dr. Frankenstein. But anything could happen during a Mad Monster Party. This production was done by Rankin and Bass, who brought you the classics Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Santa Claus is Coming to Town, so it feels like it fits into that shared universe. As expected, the animation is great, and the creatures are all lively and silly. Plus, we get to see all the classic monsters in glorious stop motion, such as Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and the Invisible Man, as well as many others. The Invisible Man stuck out the most to me, as I really enjoy how they animated his character. He's mostly just a floating fez with sunglasses and a robe, but they did a great job at making the objects appear as though they were floating through the air. I didn't notice any wires or anything. Like other Rankin and Bass productions, this film includes a handful of musical numbers. I will admit they aren't nearly as catchy as Frosty the Snowman or Put One Foot in Front of the Other, and they also feel a bit dated. Boris Karloff does the voice of Dr. Frankenstein, and I found it humorous that they not only made his character look like him, but they also designed Frankenstein's monster to look very similar to him, as Karloff played Frankenstein in the Universal films over 30 years prior to this film's release. This pick was very enjoyable, and it would be a great one for kids. I'm not sure why it didn't grow in popularity as well as the other Christmas movies, but it's a hidden gem that's worth watching. Number 14, Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. This franchise confuses the hell out of me, and I find a lot of the story hard to follow, but I still enjoyed this one for its great effects and brutal kills. One of my favorites being near the beginning, where someone's head explodes. Good stuff. For a large portion of the story, Pinhead is stuck in some sort of evil pillar thing, and he requires souls to get out. I like how he was fairly helpless until he racked up the soul count, as it shows the limitations of his seemingly limitless powers. I've heard that there were some complaints about the Cenobite designs, but I honestly thought they were pretty cool, albeit in a cheesy kind of way. One has a camera for an eye, and he looks like a Borg reject. Another has a bartender gimmick and shoots flames, and the coolest one kills his victims by shooting CDs at them. Now that's rad. Number 15, The Exorcist Believer. 2 girls become possessed, and it's up to their families to work together in order to save them from eternal damnation. Like The Rage Carrie 2 and An American Werewolf in Paris, this one suffers from being a sequel, as the bar is once again set pretty high. But I will say, it does come closer to hitting that bar than the other sequels in this year's marathon. Most of the characters are genuinely good people, so the story becomes a true good versus evil tale, as opposed to having highly flawed or deserving victims. It makes you actually care about whether they live or die. The runtime could have been cut back a bit, but overall it was a decent watch. Just don't go into it expecting the original Exorcist. Number 16, The Prowler. A masked slasher in military gear goes on a killing spree over 30 years after his first murder. The pacing is pretty slow. If they edited out about 15 to 20 minutes of some of the slower scenes, I think it would highly improve the movie, as the kills and scenes of suspense were excellently done. They should have cut out the last scene from the film as well because it's pointless and stupid. One of the best death scenes in the movie was when the killer stabs a girl with a pitchfork and raises her in the air. The effect was great for 1981, and the scene felt very realistic. Another amazing death was the head explosion, marking the second exploding head on this year's list. It's interesting that the killer's weapon of choice was a pitchfork, as Friday the 13th Part 2, which came out earlier in the same year, also included a pitchfork being used as the weapon by Jason Voorhees. The climactic finale in both films is also eerily similar in many ways. It was dumb how one of the characters was left in a jeep with plastic doors and windows to protect her from the killer. But I guess characters making dumb decisions is what really fuels these movies. Number 17, Black Friday. Terror strikes at a toy store as the employees are subject to a swarm of zombified Black Friday shoppers. There are plenty of horror veterans in this film, such as Ryan Lee, Ivana Baquero, Devon Sawa, Michael Jai White, and the one and only Bruce Campbell. The story is an interesting take on a zombie film. The style of the zombies are humans that are zombified by aliens, kind of like the zombies in Night of the Creeps, but what makes it interesting is that the story takes place on Black Friday when people are gathered in large numbers, which adds even more to the chaos. The last part of the movie gets a little weird as the zombies create a mega monster. I'm still on the fence as to whether I like this ending. My biggest complaint would be that I felt they really underutilized the cast. Michael Jai White could have had more intense action scenes, Devon Sawa could have had a better resolution for his character, and there's always room to fit in more one-liners from Bruce Campbell, even though he did have quite a few good ones in this movie. Oddly enough, while many of the films on this year's list could have been improved by shortening their runtime, I think that this one could have actually added a bit to the runtime, really beefing it up to make a more solid film. It's still a fun watch though. Number 18, Leprechaun. A leprechaun in search of his stolen gold goes on a killing spree. Notable names in the film are Warwick Davis, who plays the leprechaun in the first 6 films in the series, and Jennifer Aniston of Friends fame. This movie was very cartoonish. It honestly feels like a kid's movie a lot of the time, until the leprechaun shows up to violently murder someone. My favorite kill in this one is where the leprechaun jumps on a guy with a pogo stick until he dies. By the way, the same guy has a huge film flub right before his death, where his suspenders are clearly undone on the back. Then in the next shot, they're attached again. This drove me nuts. How did they miss that when they were filming the scene? Anyway, the leprechaun's goal is to get his pot of gold back. His weaknesses are his compulsion to stop and clean any dirty shoes, and apparently 4-leaf clovers kill him on contact. Number 19, Leprechaun 2. After missing his window of opportunity to get married on St. Patrick's Day, the leprechaun waits 1,000 years to try again with the ancestor of his original bride-to-be. The story takes place in Hollywood, with the main characters hosting a scam-haunted Hollywood tour. They also gave the leprechaun more dialogue and backstory, which I enjoyed. It's revealed that the leprechaun is 2,000 years old, and we get to see his sweet bachelor pad. One of my favorite scenes is where the hero must fight a reanimated skeleton in the leprechaun's lair. You just can't go wrong with a living skeleton in a horror movie. The leprechaun's goal is to get married on his birthday. His weaknesses are that he can't hurt anyone carrying his gold, which makes no sense as he violently cut someone up in the first movie that was in possession of his gold. And his second weakness is wrought iron. No 4-leaf clovers this time around. Number 20, Leprechaun 3. The leprechaun ends up in Las Vegas, which leads to a series of murders based on greed and magic. So basically we get to see a typical day in Vegas. The most notable star in this one is Caroline Williams, who you may recognize from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, as well as a ton of other horror films. The film starts off with the leprechaun being traded to a pawn shop in the form of a statue wearing a magical pendant around his neck. It doesn't tie into the ending of the previous films. In fact, none of the films seem to flow together so far, leaving me to wonder, is it supposed to be the same leprechaun, or are we to assume that each leprechaun is different and they all just look the same? The best death in this one is probably when one of the characters explodes, which technically brings the exploding head count to 3 on this year's list. There's also an interesting kill involving a robot. The leprechaun's goal is once again to retrieve his pot of gold. Most of the movie is about a single coin being passed between the characters, and it's revealed that possession of the coin earns a wish. So the characters make a wish, have the coin stolen by another character, then lose their wish, and then the leprechaun shows up one step behind and kills them. The leprechaun's weaknesses are his magic pendant that turns him to stone, and apparently now if he bites someone, then they'll turn into a leprechaun, even though they didn't establish this when he bit a guy in the first one. Well, at least not that we know of. Number 21, Leprechaun 4 in Space. The title really says it all. It's the distant future, and the leprechaun has intentions of marrying a princess in order to become a king. It's up to a team of space marines and scientists to stop him from achieving his sinister goal. First of all, the leprechaun already starts off in space with no explanation as to how he got there. It has to be a different leprechaun in each movie. It just has to. The spaceship animation is pretty low budget, even for 1996. But my biggest complaint about the film is that they don't really show many of the kills. It's like they sacrificed the violence for more elaborate sets and props, which was disappointing. I will say, however, that this is one of the cheesiest and funniest in the series, especially if you like dirty humor, which it's full of. My favorite kill is when the leprechaun pulls out a lightsaber and slices a guy up. It was just so random and unexpected. I also enjoyed the scene where he comes out of a dude's dick. Yeah, you heard me right. He emerges from a dude's dick. The leprechaun's goal this time is to become a king, and his weakness is, well, the vacuum of space. Oh, and he also explodes not once, not twice, but 3 times in this movie. Another character also explodes, bringing our exploding person count to 7 on this year's list. Yeah, we're changing it from exploding head to exploding person now, thanks to this series. Number 22, Leprechaun in the Hood. A rap group with aspirations of making it big in Las Vegas, for some reason, decides to pull a heist on a wealthy gangster. Things go wrong, and now they not only have an angry gangster on their trail, but also the leprechaun. Notable appearances in this film are Ice-T and Coolio, who's only in it for like 3 seconds. While this one isn't quite as strong as the previous films, we do get to enjoy quite a few rap songs throughout the course of the film. In fact, there are so many tracks that it's almost like a musical. The best kill has to be when someone gets a hole put through them, because that's like the only way anyone dies in this movie. A hole to the chest. While the kills are well done, the lack of creativity was a huge letdown. The leprechaun's goal is to retrieve his magic flute, which has the power to mesmerize people. His weakness is a magic pendant, which looks similar to the previous magic pendant, but isn't quite the same. And he's also weak to clovers. And apparently, if the clovers aren't 4-leafed, then they only weaken him and don't kill him. It's good to know. He's apparently strong enough now to withstand being in an iron safe, because in this movie and in the last, iron safes just don't hurt him like they did in the second movie. I also want to point out that the magic pendant has been in 2 of these movies now, and I don't believe it was ever actually used to stop the leprechaun in the end. Like, why even have it if they aren't going to use it? Number 23, Leprechaun Back to the Hood. A group of friends comes across a leprechaun's gold, and, you guessed it, he gets pissed off and goes on a killing spree. This entry strays from the camp and comedy a bit, and tries to take a more serious approach, which doesn't really work, as the entire concept of this series is ridiculous to begin with. It's the last installment in the series, aside from 2 reboots that I didn't get a chance to watch this time around, and it's kind of a letdown, partly because of the tonal shift, but also because the leprechaun has far less dialogue and jokes than he did in the previous films. The intro of the film is also very similar to the intro of the film Wizards. Compare the 2, and you'll see exactly what I mean. The best kill is when a guy gets stabbed with a bong. But the rest of the kills are pretty lackluster, especially compared to the outlandish and creative kills in the first 4 installments of the series. The leprechaun's goal is once again to retrieve his stolen gold, and his weaknesses are clover water? I didn't know that was even a thing, but okay. And 4-leaf clovers. Except this time it takes like 20 4-leaf clover infused bullets to kill him, while even touching a 4-leaf clover was instant death in the first film. I guess he just grew a tolerance to clovers over the years. Or maybe he's just a different leprechaun. But that's just my theory. Number 24, I Know What You Did Last Summer. An accidental murder leads a group of teens running from a mysterious killer who's out for revenge. Notable names in this film are Sarah Michelle Gellar, Freddie Prinze Jr., and Jennifer Love Hewitt. It was interesting to see a horror film that takes place on the 4th of July, as most holiday-themed horror films tend to focus on Halloween or Christmas. or I guess even St. Patrick's Day. The only thing that really annoyed me was a scene where a character is running from a car. He runs straight down the road instead of off to the side where the car can't hit him. Use some common sense here, people. This is how you get got. Overall, it's a good watch. It's not amazing, but it's still fairly enjoyable and it's worth checking out. Number 25, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. A year after the events of the previous film, the survivors and their friends must once again face off against a mysterious killer, this time on a remote island in the Bahamas. Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr. both return, with newcomers Brandy, Jeffrey Combs, and Jack Black joining the cast. Although Combs and Black aren't in the film nearly enough. I mean, honestly, if both these actors had larger roles in the film, I may have enjoyed it even more than the first. Luckily, neither actor disappoints as they are both fantastic in their roles. One of my biggest complaints about this one is the same as the first, where a character runs from a vehicle by going straight down the road, where the vehicle could easily catch up to him. They did not learn their lesson when they made the first movie. I also dislike how the movie completely disregards the ending of the first film, where a main character is once again attacked. Apparently, they forgot about the ending when they wrote this script. Number 26, I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer. A new group of friends pulls a prank that goes terribly wrong, which leads to them being chased by a mysterious killer. This film feels like it had a way lower budget than the first two films, and the cinematography is nowhere near as professionally done, which makes it feel more like a student film than a new installment in the series. The use of flashing images and quick cut edits was annoying, as it felt cheap and made scenes even more confusing. This film is sloppily tied into the others. It adds supernatural elements which could have improved the franchise if done correctly, but instead just distances the film from the previous movies even more. Which is kind of a good thing, as this movie was a big old turd. Number 27, All Hallows Eve, a series of short stories centered around a cursed VHS tape. The film is set up like a family is watching a mysterious tape, but the images they're watching are fairly cinematic, which sort of takes away from that found footage idea behind the tape. There are 3 shorts, one about girls that are trapped in a tunnel with a monster at the end that eats them, one about an alien that likes to wiggle around, and one about a girl at a gas station, which has some sort of weird grainy effect on the video to make it look vintage. But she uses a cell phone, so it's obviously not supposed to be old footage. I'm really not sure what the logic was behind applying the grainy effect on this one. This film also features the character Art the Clown, who returns in the Terrifier films, which are centered around his character. Number 28, All Hallows Eve 2. Another series of short clips that are centered around a cursed VHS tape. There are far more segments in this one, so many that I actually lost count. I wouldn't call them stories, because many of them feel like snippets from a larger story, with no goals or character development. It was almost like they wanted to film a specific scene without doing the full story around it, so the segments sort of felt pointless in the end. While this one also features a cursed VHS tape, the killer isn't Art the Clown, but instead some guy wearing a carved pumpkin mask. He looks cool, but he's a pretty lackluster character. I will say that the cinematography improved compared to the first film, but not enough to make this sequel feel any better than the original. Number 29, Terrifier. Art the Clown returns, and he is out for blood, and lots of it. I mean, this film is brutally dark and violent. The guy even saws a girl in half long ways, starting with her lady bits. It's relentless, but just unrealistic enough that it isn't unenjoyable, if that makes sense. Aside from the gore fest, Art also leaves behind a little present in the bathroom at the pizza place. He straight up shits diarrhea all over the bathroom and writes his name on the wall in crap. This dude is the definition of insane. This film was created by Damien Leone, the same guy who brought us All Hallows Eve 1 and 2. The cinematography is once again improved since the All Hallows Eve films. One scene I enjoyed in particular was where a girl is looking through a peephole and sees Art dancing around while wearing someone else's skin. It was suspenseful, but also well shot, as it shows the girl's perspective as she hides in terror. This film was well made, and I can see why people like it, but it wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, as it focused more on excessive gore and very little on actual story or character development. Number 30, Terrifier 2. Picking up where Terrifier 1 left off, Art the Clown now has his eyes set on a young girl named Sienna and her family. The quality improves once again on this installment, as the cinematography looks even better, and we actually get some great character development and a little more insight into Art the Clan's origin. The characters actually feel like real people. The reactions feel natural, and the acting is all fantastic. We're also introduced to a new character, a little girl clown who is kind of like a daughter to Art in a way. We're to assume that she's tied into an incident where a little girl died, but they don't really explain her true connection to Art. This film also ups the musical score, as it uses lots of cool 80s synth music, which gives the film a little more of a nostalgic feel. While the gore level is still cranked up to 110%, it's not the main focus this time around. There's a lot more story, and the violence is spread out sporadically throughout the film instead of just being non-stop like it was in the first one. Oh, and there are 2 more head explosions in this movie, officially bringing our count to 9 on the list. Speaking of things we were doing counts on, I think in this one and the last one we got to see Art the Clown's bare ass, so our men's ass count is, I don't even know where it's at now. Higher than I want it to be. Number 31, The Fog. A mysterious fog engulfs a quiet coastal town and brings with it ghostly visitors. This was another John Carpenter movie that I somehow missed, so I was excited to check it out. It was a great pick for the last film of the marathon. The pacing and overall feel was reminiscent of a Stephen King story, which I enjoyed. My only complaint is that they didn't show the apparitions hiding in the fog as much as they could have. We only get to see glimpses of them until the end, and then the ending is fairly quick. What they did show of the ghost was pretty cool though. And that concludes my 31 movies of the year. But wait, there's more. I was actually able to squeeze in a few extra movies this year, so why not share my thoughts on those as well? Number 32, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. A loose reboot of the 1974 film of the same name, this film focuses on a group of friends traveling through Texas that come across a mysterious woman which leads them to trouble. The film features Jessica Biel, as well as R. Lee Ermey, who is absolutely great. His character makes the film, as he's not only scary, but also hilarious. One notable difference between this film and the original is that they actually show Leatherface's face, revealing that he's physically deformed and uses people's faces as masks to hide his own appearance. It's worth noting that this is another film where someone dies from a crotch wound, this time brought about by Leatherface's chainsaw. Ouch. I actually enjoyed this movie more than the original, which isn't saying much as the original film was never one of my favorites to begin with. It was not only a great remake, but also a thoroughly enjoyable horror film overall. Number 33, Near Dark. A young man gets mixed up with a gang of ruthless vampires after turning into a vampire himself. Notable names are Jenny Wright, Lance Henriksen, and Bill Paxton. You just can't go wrong with Bill Paxton. And he's definitely the most memorable character, as his vampire is completely off the rails and psycho crazy. The movie focuses on sunlight being deadly to vampires. It was almost like that was their only weakness. But they did do some cool effects with this idea, where the vampire's skin starts to burn and melt whenever they're exposed to sunlight. The pacing was a bit slow, and I wish that they would have went into more detail on the characters' backstories. But they do allude to the idea that the characters may not be able to remember their past lives very well. I also wish that there had been a few more good kills to really spice up the action a bit. I can confirm, however, that one kill gets added to the list. That's right, we got our last exploding person for the marathon, bringing our final kill count to 10 exploding persons. Number 34, Five Nights at Freddy's. A struggling security guard desperately takes on a night job at an abandoned children's restaurant, but the restaurant holds within it a dark past. Basically, it's like Chuck E. Cheese, but if the animatronics came to life and killed people. I enjoyed how the animatronics were done with practical effects and not CGI, which added to the sense of realism, and honestly made them all the more creepy. The film is an adaptation of a video game series, which I've admittedly never played. But I felt like if I had played the games, then some of the elements of the story would have made a little more sense. They pack a lot of information into the story, yet don't fully explain certain things, like if all the animatronics are possessed, then is the cupcake animatronic possessed too? Luckily, I know someone who's very familiar with the games and was able to answer my questions. I hope that they make a sequel to this movie that fills in some of the little gaps and adds even more to this film's lore. Overall, Five Nights at Freddy's was a great pick to officially finish up this year's Halloween-a-thon. If you did a Halloween-a-thon of your own this year, or watched any new movies that you'd like to talk about, let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video if you enjoyed it, and I hope you all have a happy Halloween.